Welcome to Epic Begins with One Step Forward, the podcast that reveals how to plan, achieve, and enjoy the journey of creating epic results in your life, business, health, and relationships. Here's your host, best-selling author and motivational speaker, Zander Sprague.
Hello, epic people, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Epic Begins with One Step Forward. I'm your host, Zander Sprague, and today is a special day because I am talking to Annie Sklaver Orenstein. Annie, tell us who you are and what you do.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here. So I'm Annie Sklaver Orenstein. I am a researcher. I work in tech as a research lead, but I also am an author. And I recently wrote a book called Always a Sibling, The Forgotten Mourner's Guide to Grief, which came out back in May. And it's a book on grieving the loss of a sibling. And I wrote it, it came out about 15 years after I lost my oldest brother, Ben, who was killed in Afghanistan. And at the time when he was killed, I had a very hard time finding any resources that really resonated with me. And the book is very much kind of the resource that I needed at the time. And it's research informed and backed with both academic research and also my own primary research. And and now it's out, and it's been a pretty incredible experience.
Absolutely. And I too am a sibling survivor. I lost my sister coming up on 28 years ago. I've actually written two books. One was for siblings. Much like you, I too found a complete lack of resources for siblings. So I wrote about my experience. I got 5 of my friends who had lost siblings to answer these questions. So I think this is really cool. We have a lot to talk about.
Absolutely.
And first and foremost, I'm sure your experience has been that it's being a sibling survivor is at times a lonely experience.
Yeah. People
ask how your parents are, but no one asked how you were.
Exactly. It's the forgotten mourners.
Absolutely. I talk about the forgotten mourners all the time. And so I'm interested to know, because I know a lot about this. I talk about sibling loss a lot. I sit on the board of the Compassionate Friends, which is organization for families that have lost a child, a sibling, or a grandchild. I'm the sibling rep, so I do a lot of work for and with siblings. But you said that you had some research back information in your book, and I am fascinated to know what some of that research is.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so as a researcher, by training, I felt like that was the way that I knew to approach the situation. Otherwise, I could really only speak to my own unique experience, and as someone who got along very well, with her siblings, and we didn't experience a traumatic childhood, and my brother being killed in Afghanistan, the kind of support and response we received from our community was very different than, folks I know who have lost siblings to addiction or mental health issues. And so I knew that there was no way I could really speak to the full sibling loss experience and all of those various factors, because I was coming from a very narrow place.
Sure.
And so the book is, a lot of what's in there comes from academic research on grief and familial bereavement. There are some studies on sibling loss,
Not a
certainly
lot.
not enough
Not
studies
yet.
on
No,
sibling
trust me.
loss. they all end in more research is needed on sibling loss. So that's, a delight to find. But, really kind of extensively on the research that does exist on sibling loss, also a lot of research on the sibling relationship and just the general impact of a sibling relationship. And then on top of that, I surveyed, it was a little over 350 bereaved siblings. And from there did follow-up in-depth interviews with about 40 folks who really, in terms of recruitment, really kind of covered a lot of the bases, especially areas that I couldn't speak to firsthand. So interviews with folks who have, lost older siblings and younger siblings, had good relationships, fraught relationships, different causes of death.
Sure, absolutely.
And really, capturing a lot of those experiences. And that's much of what's reflected in the book.
Absolutely. And that is awesome. And thank you so much for doing it, because you were right. There is so much need. When I was in graduate school, obviously one of my big focus is on sibling loss. So there were times where I wanted to write papers, and I, even to this day, am challenged as I'm talking. I was finding research to back up what I know to be true. Right. I was asked to come talk to a local healthcare, like their psychologists and stuff, their counseling staff. But I needed to have like 4 academic papers to back up what I was saying. And I was really hard pressed. And I said, look, going in, when they told me that, I'm like, look, that's fine. You got to give me, I can find studies, but if it has to be within the last 10 years, I'm going to be hard pressed to have 4 of them, because they aren't there. Can I just bring in whatever, like kind of what I can find? And it's and I spent a lot of time trying to advocate for siblings, because as my friend Heidi Horsley says, when you lose a sibling, you lose your past, your present, but also your future. There's all those things that unfortunately your brother, you expected he would see, be it promotions, major life events. So
absolutely. And I spoke with some kind of family dynamic and sibling experts, and for the book, and I would ask them, like, why isn't there this research? And they have logical explanations, but not necessarily like good ones, logical explanations that basically point to why this is a very difficult subject matter to study, because there are so many factors involved and you can't control for them. And so, a lot of times that becomes a very scary kind of study to do and a hard study to back. I don't think it's a reason not to do it, but it was interesting to me that so many of these studies really consistently found that the loss of a sibling led to, significant psychological, even physical issues later in life, and these like very long-term effects from losing a sibling. But yet they all end with, sibling losses, it's extremely significant, and it's the most under-researched form of familial loss. More research is needed, and then it ends. There's no more research.
Absolutely. And in my experience, and I say this when I'm talking, like, look, my background tells me, and my experience tells me from myself and from talking with other sibling survivors, that the unacknowledged grief has a profound effect on people. However, just like the research backs up, really hard to point to causality, which of course science wants. Hey, we're seeing that and I'll just use an example of self-medication, right? That there was these people seem to start to self-medicate after they lost their sibling. However, there was a family history of substance use, and there
Mm-hmm.
was, so you can't point, even though you and I might look at it and go, uh-huh, I'm pretty sure. And I think that the fact that sibling loss is, people don't know about it, and I don't know how they don't
Right.
know about it, Annie. I did some,
Mm-hmm.
I obviously, like you, did some research, did some, math and statistics. There's over 1.3 million new sibling survivors in the US every year. That's across the whole entire age range. So, I can't break it down and go, well, of that, 60% are people over 70 years old or something. But it's still significant, and it's still, we're everywhere. I'm sure you and I,
Mm-hmm.
walking through the supermarket, there are sibling survivors that we're passing, and we're
Yes.
everywhere, and yet we're all alone. We all walk around, and we don't have some special signal, hand signal, that we could say, I'm a sibling survivor.
And it's been really interesting, even just since working on the book. We queried, went out on submission to a bunch of publishers, and unbeknownst to us, there were multiple editors who got back to us and said, I am the audience for this book. I lost
Yeah,
a sibling. Well, we didn't know that when we were querying them. There's no real way to know, right? Similarly, um, when the book was then announced, my editor at Hachette got a bunch of messages from folks internally who said, you know, can I have an advanced copy of this book? I'm the audience. And my editor was like, these are people I've worked with for a long time. And I had no idea that they had lost a sibling. And so people, even just conversations I've had with other parents at like my kids' school events, and they'll ask what I do. And honestly, depending on my mood, sometimes I lean into tech and sometimes I lean into the book and whether or not I want to talk about it. And it's been the same kind of thing where people tell me that they've lost a sibling, and if I hadn't kind of initiated and said it first, I wouldn't have known.
absolutely. And when I'll ask people what they do, they'll ask what I do. And although I shouldn't be surprised after all of these years of talking about it, I am. Yeah, I honestly, every time I was on a call with a company that was, I'm wanted to do some, was pitching me to sell me something, and I'm like, that's great. And I just mentioned about the sibling loss. The man on the call is like, oh gosh, yeah, I lost my brother 3 years ago, and you know, I honestly haven't really talked about it. I've
Mm-hmm.
had people who, when I mention it, say I lost my brother 15, 20 years ago. My family never talks about it, and I've never gotten to talk about it. And then this, yeah, so I mean, again, it is
Mm-hmm.
amazing. Although, from I guess, understanding the numbers going, yeah, if there's over 1 million people in the US, there's a good chance that
Right.
we're going to,
Statistically, it makes sense.
statistically, they're like,
Mm-hmm.
we're everywhere. And yet, we're nowhere. We're the forgotten mourners. People don't, and yet when you bring it up, people go, oh my gosh, yes, that's totally logical. Right?
Right.
It's not hard to conceptually yet, and yet no one has thought about it. So,
Mm-hmm.
a part of my mission is to raise that awareness, where the question is not only how how are your parents, but how are you doing, or how are the siblings doing?
Yes.
Because the sibling relationship, it's the longest one we'll have in our life. And for good or for
Mm-hmm.
bad, whether, no matter what your relationship is, that person is most likely one of your best friends. They know you better than you know yourself, and you know
Mm-hmm.
them better than they know themselves. That sibling relationship is, with your, here, I'll ask you this question. If you happen to get into an argument with your brother,
Hmm.
Did you start off kind of nicely and saying things that were mildly hurtful, or were you swinging for the fences, saying the thing that you knew was going to hurt them?
I mean, probably the latter.
Absolutely, we're all swinging.
Uh-huh.
Look, we got the dirt on each other, and when we get
Hmm.
upset, hurt, whatever, we're not, saying, "Oh, Annie, you got a really bad haircut last week." No, you're saying
Hmm.
that, like, the thing that's gonna,
Right.
and they're coming back with the thing that's gonna hurt you, that you're sensitive about, and that's part of
Hmm.
that sibling relationship. So
But you know what's so funny about it? So I have two brothers, right? So one I have one who's still alive,
yeah,
and um my my dad sent this email to us last week with like something my brother had written years ago that, my dad was like, look what I found,
yeah,
right? And I really wanted to rip on my brother and make fun of him, but also I like didn't want my parents to see, because I wanted to make fun of him for something that I still didn't know if they knew about. Meanwhile, we're in our 40s, right? And so I'm like messaging him on the side in a separate thread so that I can rag on him, but rag on him without revealing any of his secrets to my parents,
absolutely. Although I
and
bet you
it's
your
like this,
parents
it
do
never ends.
know.
Of course they do. But it never ends, right? Like even in our 40s, it's the same kind of thing.
Oh yeah, my younger sister. I mean, there's, if for whatever reason we get into it, we are absolutely going for, you're swinging for the fences. You're because you're like,
Hmm.
oh, I'm winning this, or if I'm not, I'm
And I
going
know
down
how.
swinging hard.
Yep, exactly.
But I think
Exactly.
that's part of that sibling relationship, and then when it's gone, it's hard. I tell stories of my sister to keep her alive in my life, but I don't canonize her. You want to know what? There were
Hmm.
times where my sister was not a very nice person,
Hmm.
and she wasn't angelic and all of that. She was flawed, just like I am, just like you are. And I think it's important, for those of you who are listening who may also have lost a sibling, that don't canonize them. Tell the stories, the good and the bad, the times where they weren't nice, where they did
Hmm.
mess up, because that keeps the whole picture alive, not just all I ever hear is all of the good things. Parents tend to do
Hmm.
that. Oh, well, your brother wouldn't do that. Yeah, I'm competing against a dead person. I'm never going to win, right?
Right. 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 And I think, it makes the grief even more complicated when, to your point, maybe they weren't always nice, right? Maybe it wasn't always a positive experience. Maybe you were estranged. Maybe, you know, there was trauma in
Yeah,
there. And so it becomes, in some cases, even more complicated, because maybe you were estranged, but you always held out kind of a hope for reconciliation. Or, maybe there's relief that follows their death, and then there's the guilt that comes with feeling relief. But
absolutely.
all of that really, like, it's part of what makes it so unique in a lot of ways, but it is also part of what makes it so difficult to navigate. Because there were a lot of people I talked to who were like, my life is easier now, right? They caused a lot of issues. There were a lot of problems.
Sure.
I was constantly having to do this, that, and the other thing. And that, the fact that things might be easier, the fact that there might be a piece of relief there, makes them feel terrible and makes them feel guilty. And this,
Oh, well,
the kind
yeah,
of snowball grows.
absolutely. And there is all of that. I mean, there's so much. I wrote a book called Why Don't They Cry? Understanding Your Living Child's Grief, which was for parents. And it came directly from my work, where I'd be, people know I talk about siblings, but parents would come up to me all the time and say, I lost a son or daughter, but I have other living children, and, kind of why don't they ever grieve in front of me? And I'd say, okay, well, how old are they? If they're older than 15, we're not gonna come to you, mom and dad, because we
Mm-hmm.
understand how significant this loss is, and we're not about to pile on to that. And I
Yep.
probably 5 years after my sister died, I have a great relationship with my mom and my dad before he passed. And I said, yeah, God, there were days where I needed you, but I wasn't about to come to you. I was 28. And my mom's like, why
Mm-hmm.
not? And I'm like, because I know I could see what you were going through. And I wasn't about to, but the last thing you needed was for me to come in and
Mm-hmm.
say, Mom, I need your support. I need your help. I need to cry on your shoulder. And she's like, but I'm your mom. And I'm like, I get it, but I'm not doing that. I may go to my friends. I may try and deal with it myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And um, yeah, it is a very interesting experience, and there are so many mixed emotions. There are lots of people I know who lost siblings to substance abuse, overdoses, and stuff, and they're like, I drew the line. He stole from me. He lied to me. And I love to ask this question. I go, that's true, but if he or she really needed you, they're like, yeah, I'd be there. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
try and hold the line, but they're like, it's your brother or sister. You're just going to be there for them. They can.
Mm-hmm.
Let's face it. Growing up, we threw each other under the bus repeatedly. I mean, we screwed each other over all the time, right? I discovered after my sister died and talking with my parents and stuff, um, my mom knew probably 95% of the things that my sister and I did or tried to do or whatever. And I was like, I never thought that she would know. I thought we were so crafty and stuff. And she's like, yeah, a mother knows, yeah, I knew that. In the same way you had that whole thing where you're like, I'm going to have the side thread with my brother and give him
Right.
because I don't know. And yet I bet you at least your mom, if not your mom and dad, go, yeah, we totally knew about them. We've known about that
Mm-hmm.
for, since 5 seconds after it happened.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's certainly it is interesting. And
Yeah.
your book is so needed. There's obviously we need a lot more resources for people. And I do want to just take a moment here and say that if you have lost a sibling, the Compassion Friends is an awesome organization. We have such a strong sibling community. You can find Facebook groups. We have Zoom meetings. It is awesome. Um, and I
Absolutely.
didn't discover them until I was 19 years into my journey, and I wish I had discovered them way before then. And that's one of my things as a board member. Like, I want to raise the awareness. More people got to know about this great organization because I can tell you, Annie, I'll invite you. We have a national conference coming up in July in Bellevue, Washington. But if you happen to come, you'd be like, I am with my people who get me and validate me. And there's something about getting your grief validated, being around people who know you. And as you're going around, you're in school, you're talking to parents and they go, oh, I lost her brother or sister. There's this instant little connection, I think, of,
Yep.
oh, we can I have someone to talk to who will get everything and I don't have to explain it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could just say, my parents and anniversary or birthday or holiday or whatever. And the other person's like, yep, you know. And so
Absolutely.
you get to talk right away about what it is versus, all right, well, let me explain what's going on with my parents and when it comes to Christmas
Mm-hmm.
and my brother and all of this. And so you spend a half hour trying to explain to get this person who doesn't know so that you could then talk about the thing that you really wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
But I find when I get to talk to other sibling survivors, I'm like, this. And then you're shaking your head going, uh huh, yeah.
Right. You don't even need to finish your sentence.
Right.
Like,
I get to go right into it. I get to like,
mhm,
okay, now what about this? What do you do here? How are you
yeah.
doing this? Right. And there's something incredibly, I don't know, uplifting about like I get to talk to someone who sees me, gets me, will validate where I'm coming from, and give me some perspective that says, hey, maybe I've experienced that, and here's what I did, and it helps you because
Hmm.
we get stuck in.
Hmm. Hmm. And it's been interesting too. It was very uh, isolating for me for a long time. I did
Oh gosh,
not
yeah,
find any kind of support group or anything like that. And then I started writing this book and interviewing and talking to a lot of siblings. And since the book has come out, and even with people in my life, when they knew I was doing it, um, people who have lost siblings, some of whom are like my parents' friends, and I didn't even know they had lost siblings, and they lost siblings, 30, 40 years ago, would come up to me and say, did anyone ever, has anyone that you talk to ever said they feel like X? Or did anyone
hmm
ever talk to you about Y? And it's always this moment of like, am I, I'm a little nervous to ask. Maybe it's just me. I don't know if it's just me. And I swear to you, every single question people have asked, I'm like, oh yeah, I heard that a bunch of times.
yeah,
I was talking to someone who said, she was like, I don't know if this is like something that you've heard, but it feels like a loss that happened to my mother, not to me. And I was like, I have heard that 4 times in the last 3 weeks. Like,
yeah,
not, it is not just you. And there have been so many it is not just you moments that have come out of this. And I have ended up almost playing like connecting these things, between people who haven't talked to other people who have lost siblings and who have spent, in some cases, decades being like, I'm carrying around guilt. Am I the only one who's carrying around guilt? And, I had someone ask me that and said, did anyone mention anything about guilt? And I was like, there's an entire chapter in the book on
yeah,
guilt, and he was like, okay, I'm gonna check that out. Thank you. Like,
yeah.
there's so much of it that is so unspoken yet universal. And a lot of what I was trying to do is just make it spoken, get it
A-
out there into the world so people feel less alone.
Absolutely, Annie, and thank you for that because it is preaching in the choir. I'm doing the same thing. No, honestly,
Exactly.
and I'm sorry it's such a love fest here about like the whole sibling loss and how, but it's really important. There's things like one of the things I talk about in the Why Don't They Cry book is like the new family. Okay, so
Hmm.
I was the middle child. My older sister died. Your older brother died. Right. All of a sudden,
Hmm.
you're technically the oldest child.
See, I
There's
was the youngest and I stayed the
of the
youngest,
younger.
but my
Okay,
middle brother had that experience
right.
of
And
going
so
from
all of
middle
a
to
sudden,
oldest.
and depending on your family, depending on
Hmm.
um, culture, perhaps religion, just your own family, all of that, all of a sudden there may be expectations, and you're like, what? I'm
Hmm.
supposed to do now. I have to do this. I have no idea how to do that job, and the parents,
Hmm.
without even knowing it, are like, "Oh, you're the oldest. You need to be doing this. You need to take this role," and you're like, "I am so not prepared for that." So I specifically talk about it because I want parents to know. I
Hmm.
do a workshop at the national conference, um, called Why Don't They Cry? And uh, it's a conference of about 1,000 people. So, and there are obviously concurrent workshops, etc. If I have like 15 or 20 people, I think I'm doing well. I
Hmm.
regularly in the last couple of years have had like 30 or 40, like almost maximum in the room. Because parents want to understand this. They're like, I am desperate to know what I can
Hmm.
do for my living children. And when I
There was,
bring, go ahead.
oh no, sorry, finish. Sorry.
But when I bring up the sort of the new family and the expectations, and I'm looking out at the audience, and there's like there are those, and I'm sure you've seen those moments of like, like that realization that maybe they're doing that or whatever, and I'm like, and
Mm-hmm.
so it is, oh, it's so fascinating, and it's
Yeah.
so cool that we get to be sort of, I don't know, standard bearers for this. It's sad.
Yeah.
It's sad that here we are in 2024, and something that's been going on for our whole entire existence as humans, barely researched, not talked about, not acknowledged, and we get to write books and talk about it
Mm-hmm.
and be thought leaders on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was there was a really interesting study, you've probably seen it, that, and I wish I had it in front of me, but they did, um, they surveyed parents of surviving siblings and
Mm-hmm.
the surviving siblings, and they gave the surviving siblings, they kind of walked them through the questionnaire to diagnose PTSD,
Yeah.
and then they gave the same uh, survey to parents to fill out for their children. And there was this incredible disconnect where it was something like 98% of the surviving siblings qualified for PTSD, but based on parent responses, they only identified like 20 something percent,
Sure.
because the surviving siblings were hiding so much from their parents
Oh,
because they
absolutely.
didn't want to worry their parents. They wanted the parents to think that they were okay. They didn't want to concern them. They didn't want to make anything worse. They didn't want to make anything harder. So it was with these best of intentions, but all of the, the parents were like, my kid seems fine, based on the surveying, most of them were not experiencing PTSD. But when the surviving siblings were honest on the test, almost every single one of them was. And it just kind of shows this disconnect. And it wasn't necessarily, it's an interesting situation where everyone has the best of intentions, right? The parents are trying, and they're trying so hard, and the kids think that they're doing the right thing by kind of protecting their parents from what they're going through.
Yeah.
But the result is this just wild disconnect between
Absolutely.
the real situation.
Right. I referenced that. I came up with a name for it. I call it the vicious circle of caring. Okay. And here's how it goes. It kills me to see my parents sad, so I want to take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
Parent says, I see my child suffering. I want to take care of them. Well, here's the thing. Everyone's trying to take care of everyone else, but no one's taking care of their own grief. And therefore, no one's actually moving forward on they're not working their way through their own grief. And so, like, everyone's trying to take care of everyone else, because I don't, if I'm taking care of you, Annie, I don't have to take care of my own grief, and I don't have to, like, go through this painful process.
Yep.
And yet everyone's actually in the same place continuously.
Yeah. And a lot of times, that leads to really, to the surviving sibling experiencing delayed grief and prolonged grief and all of these things that come with suppressing your own grief,
Absolutely.
where they find their parents are actually moving through grief, in a way that they aren't.
Well, yeah, and in part that's because society says, "Oh my gosh, you've lost a child. Here's all of this support and acknowledgement and validation.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we not getting that validation?" Again, comes back to,
Mm-hmm.
I think I couldn't prove it in a scientific study, but my experience is it has a profound effect on all of
Yes.
us.
Yep.
And and that makes me sad. I just, it's unnecessary.
Completely agree.
So, well, Annie, you and I obviously could talk for hours about this because there is so much to talk about. But how can people get a hold of you? How can they find your book?
Yes, so the book, Always the Sibling, The Forgotten Mourner's Guide to Grief, is available everywhere books are sold.
Cool.
Amazon, bookstores, everywhere, bookshop.org. And you can find me on Instagram at Annie Sklaver Orenstein.
Okay. And I will have a link to how to get a hold of Annie in the show description. Annie, I want to thank you so much for one, writing the book, two, coming here and sharing it with me and with my audience.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And as always, I want to remind people that if you're ready to begin your epic journey, go to epicbegins.com. Remember, epic choices lead to the epic life that you want.
Get your gift copy of the award-winning book, Epic Begins with One Step Forward, at epicbegins.com. That's a wrap on this episode of Epic Begins with One Step Forward with your host, Zander Sprague, best-selling author, internationally acclaimed public speaker, and licensed professional clinical counselor. To make your next conference or event epic, send an email to Zander at zander@epicbegins.com. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Remember, epic choices, epic life.